So I'm Lois Letchford. Hit like, hit subscribe. We've got to get our introduction going so that when people know who we are, what we are. And you are?
I am Lisa McCarty. I am a nurse and a mother of 2 dyslexic sons.
2 out of 3.
2 out of 3, right.
I think I've got 2 out of 3 as well. So, and you know, we talked about Nicholas and knowing that, thank you.
So if she's talking, you just click on it.
Okay. We talked about Nicholas and, you know, his experience of going from non-reading to really to the top of the academic tree, and then asking him, I've got an echo, Isaac, and asking him to explain what happened in grade 1, and he just shut down. That was one of my realizations that there was trauma. The other one is, since I've been, you know, promoting my book, I have met other mothers of my age. Isaac's checking the sound volume for us.
I'd say just turn down your mic.
I'll turn down my mic a bit.
Just
Okay.
turn down your volume.
Yeah. Perfect.
I'm getting a little bit of delay, but oh well.
Yeah. I've met other mothers. And one lady said to me, Lois, I can't like your story. I've been in that position and my child didn't make it. Or, you know. And I contacted her and said, our journey was so fragile. And I had this conversation. I had this conversation with 2 people. And I said to them, I want to help get your story out. And would you write a blog post for me? And they both said, yes, we'll write a blog post. We'll write a blog post. Great. I wait. And I wait. Then I contact them and say, how are you getting on? Yes, we're doing okay, blah, blah, blah. The blog post doesn't come. And that's when I realized it's not because they don't want to share their story. It's because of the going back and rewriting and re-experiencing all of those things from years ago was traumatic for them. And it's actually to say write a blog post is not simple. And that's what caused me to say when learning is trauma.
Yeah, I as you know, I have 2 different stories so far. And when I think back on what I call the failure story, and I don't mean to say that my son is a failure, but I do mean that the system failed.
Yes.
Failed him.
Yes.
And when I think back on all of that, it makes me feel so guilty as a mom that I should have known
This
this.
should be the main thing. You have to click on it.
Thank you. Yep.
Am I echoing, by the way?
No, you're doing well. Yeah.
It's lagging, but that's because of how many people are
Yeah.
on it.
My husband's on as well. So, but I've got to click on you when you talk.
Oh, I got it.
So we see. Yeah.
Yeah, but you know, there's so many emotions.
Yes.
And I'm in a weird position because, as you mentioned, I have 3 boys. 2 of them are dyslexic. One of them, the system completely failed.
Yeah.
To get him through it. And the other son almost failed him until we fought like heck to get him out of that. But now I'm in a position where there's almost a competition. Well, there's always going to be a competition with siblings. But, you know, my one son looks at my other son and sees that he's getting all this stuff. He's getting the red carpet rolled out. And what did he get?
Yeah.
So I have to go through. So I guess my point is there's a lot of emotion with a different learner to begin with. And then you have to put on top of that all these other things. And if you're in my position where you had one who failed through the system and another one that's getting help, it's just another layer of emotion.
Yeah.
And sometimes I have to stop myself from allowing my own mind to revisit all of that. So I can completely see how somebody would be not wanting to revisit it.
Yes. Yes.
But we have to get this story out.
Well, that's what I thought, that it's, this Nicholas is one story of many, and it's the fragility of his story that frightens me. And one lady said, my son was locked in a cupboard at school.
Ugh.
I don't know for how long, I don't know the details, but it was obviously horrific. And she only found out when her son was in high school. So the children don't tell us what's going on, and that leaves us in a guilt position as well.
And the children might not realize what's going on. How do they
Yes.
know that something's
Yes.
normal or not normal, or how do they know that this isn't their fault?
Yes.
They're looking around at their classmates who can do these things seemingly effortlessly, and they can't.
Yes.
And so what would be my initial thought would be there's something wrong with me.
Yes.
And so we can expect the kids to come and say this is what's happening, because they don't know that. I don't know if I shared the story of when my youngest son realized he was dyslexic, and he asked me what dyslexia was. And now up until this point, I never told him he was dyslexic, although I used the term, but I was a little afraid of labeling him. That's another thing.
Yes.
And so I didn't sit him down and tell him he's dyslexic and this is what this means. But again, remember, I thought that the school understood what this was, because after all, he was getting the Wilson reading instruction. If he's getting Wilson instruction, they must understand dyslexia. They must know what to do. And that's one of the things that we try to bring out to parents. You can't just trust the school system, not to bash them, but you have to do your own research. So when my son asked me about dyslexia, he then asked me if he was dyslexic. And I said, yeah. And he went, oh, well, that explains it. And his self-esteem from that point on started to increase, because it was at that moment that he realized that it wasn't because he was stupid. It wasn't something that was his fault.
Yeah.
But the kids don't know that.
That's
why it's so important for the schools to be able to address this.
Yes. 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 What I did was I didn't say Nicholas was dyslexic or anything, but I provided Nicholas role models. And Richard Wright was one of our first ones.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
He struggled with learning to read, and look what he built. And
Right.
the role model was as much for me as it was for Nicholas.
Mm-hmm.
To give me some hope about it's just a nightmare of a journey.
But what do you do if you're a parent who has no idea what this is? What do you do if you're the parent like I was, trusting that the school understood what this was? What do you do?
Yeah.
Who's the role model? You don't even know. They don't even know what the problem is. The kids don't know what the problem is. So how can you find a role model if nobody knows what the problem is? What do you think parents need to do to uncover this?
That's a huge question that you've asked. Because you're absolutely right that we're not saying to the kids, there are other people like you, and like you said, you feel so alone. And the child, I think, blames themselves.
Absolutely, they would.
For their lack of success. So we have to keep promoting it, don't we? That we can get around it, that learning to read is one component of life, but they've got strengths in other things, in other areas. And although it's a complex problem, it's a problem that we do know the solutions to.
Right. Well, right. We know the solutions, but there again is one of the problems. Obviously, this information is being kept out of the schools for several reasons. I would argue most of that would be financial. And, we touched on this the other day. The schools, the teachers, they are overwhelmed. And especially now with this COVID-19.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to fix this. There was a state representative, I won't say who it was, but when we were talking about some of this problem, as it is same thing in the city schools, and this person's response was, well, they have so many other problems.
Yeah.
Meaning we can't do anything about that because they've got so many other problems. And I'm like, well, that's not an excuse to do nothing.
Yes.
Plus, this is a giant problem. And this problem, the problem of literacy or low literacy skills, is at the bottom of all these other problems.
Yes. Yes. And that's where some of our guests, Dr. Steve Dykstra, will talk about that, because he deals with these children who have failed every single day and then come to him and live with everything, or lack of everything. I mean, I can't even talk about it because I find it so challenging.
Well, here's another thing that disturbs me. And one of the reasons I get on Facebook and do the Thoughts While Driving, and the reason I started that was because I wanted parents to know what this looks like. That, the schools, at least the schools in our area, have done a superb job of covering a lot of this up. And I have to be careful when I say that, because I already warned you, there's a lot of negative feelings still in my story. And I don't fault, I know teachers have an enormously important job and it's a hard job, but this issue of dyslexia, and in general, now we can take that outside of dyslexia and say reading instruction in general, has been so shoved under the rug for decades. So I started the Thoughts While Driving because I was frustrated that parents didn't understand what was happening. The schools were able to fool everybody, for lack of a better word, and make it seem like, well, no, they're not dyslexic. They are not paying attention. If they just tried harder, if they just paid attention, whatever. And I think one of the things that happens with parents is they get overwhelmed.
Yes.
And then they're intimidated.
Yes.
The intimidation is a huge problem. Most parents, when you go into a meeting or you meet with the teachers, it's usually one parent. Usually another parent is working and there's one parent there. And then you're the only one sitting there with a whole what I call the firing line of teachers.
Yes.
And they're all trying to, say one thing, and in your heart, what the problem is.
Yes.
How are you going to be the only one that's going to stand up in that room and fight? It's that intimidation. How are you going to be the only parent to fight through this? And some people, this is exhausting. I used to feel sick to my stomach when I had to go in for a meeting. So then I decided I'm bringing people with me. I'm gonna bring my posse with me because I need support in what I'm saying.
That was exactly Ashley Sullivan Roberts's situation. And she ended up, locking heads with the school, and what she does and how she has fought continuously for her child has just been astounding. And someone said to me from that group, it was amazing that I didn't end up in that situation. But I didn't end up in that situation because I pinpointed the problem. And then from there on, Nicholas learned, and I just kept changing things at home. But that's what happens. You end up clashing, and that's pointless for everyone.
Well, that's what I mean when the parents get overwhelmed.
Yes. Yes.
And if you're not, how's an ER nurse? I don't know how to teach somebody how to read. I could tell there was a problem, but I didn't know what it was. Yeah. And I think I mentioned in our case with my youngest son, by the 4th grade, we knew he was dyslexic. Then the pushback we got from the school, and I didn't know any better. I mean, I'm not an educator. So we kept fighting that fact, and I kept pointing out, well, his reading level's not improving. So finally, after a couple years of this, they said, well, we'll give him the Wilson reading. And it was at that moment I thought, okay, well, I guess I've won.
Right.
They know what the problem is now. But that was a mistake because they still didn't know what the problem was. That's where the guilt comes in. That's where I have to live with every single day, that I didn't understand the entire problem and I was an exhausted parent. So it's one thing to know what the problem is and be, this exhausted parent and you're all alone and you're intimidated by the school. And then it's quite another to be a parent that doesn't even know where to start. So, but I think that in doing this series, it's a really good way to drive it home that we've got to fight for all these kids and we've got to do our research and we have to be parents who are doing our own research because it's that important. If we don't support these kids, they can wind up in some very unfortunate situations.
Yes.
Forever.
And I've clicked on the wrong thing. I was just so thankful that Nicholas didn't end up in one of these standardized reading programs. They would have been disastrous for him. Disastrous. And they would have said he just can't learn it. He's just not getting it. And we've provided this. This program says it's worked. And it didn't. It wouldn't have worked for Nicholas.
And it doesn't work for that small percentage of kids. And when we say a small percentage, it doesn't mean that they're unimportant. That's the thing. The schools are supposed to educate everyone.
Yeah.
Free, appropriate public education. When I'm talking about public education, it has to be everyone. And again, I think that being so underfunded is a problem, that basically the schools say, well, we don't have the resources to do that for these kids. Well, we have to.
Yes.
We have to help them.
I ended up learning a lot about reading instruction. And I think one of our bigger problems is the total focus on getting children through to the standardized test. And with that, we've lost sight of what instruction should look like. That the standardized test, the accountability, and all of these things have not given teachers autonomy over their instruction and are not allowed them to differentiate it and use the classroom as they need to effectively teach more children.
Right. And I think too, the class sizes they're too big. I mean, again, the teachers have too much to do, and you've got kids that have different backgrounds and they're coming from different places. And we touched on this the other day, that if you're a kid that doesn't have the background knowledge of the thing that you're, testing them on, well, how engaging is that going to be? How well are they going to be doing on this test? And so then why would that be the teacher's fault for being effective or not effective? I don't think the system's fair for anybody. I don't think it's fair for the teachers. I don't think it's fair for the students.
Yep.
I mean, the whole thing needs an overhaul. And I think that's when people get, we don't have the resources. We can't, we have to reorganize this. We can't keep going like this.
Yeah.
For another 30, 40 years, or however long it's taken us to prove that our scores are crap. We have to change this, and we've got to change it in a lot of different spots. We have to change it in the colleges of ed. We've got to change it in the administration. We've got to change it in the classroom, in the classrooms.
But it's what have I done? I can't lift me up. What have I done? Oh, I've done something wrong. Oh, there I am. That's why I want to get the stories out, because if they need to know that the instruction is critical. And it's all about instruction. And it goes back to mindset. That's the thing I come back to all the time. When you see a child who has failed and you've got the data to say they've failed, you as a parent don't have a leg to stand on. And so the motto I want to get through is learning problems dwell in activities and cultural practices and not in the heads of individuals.
I agree.
That's our
Who
motto.
said that? Who did you say said that?
That's Kurt Dudley Marling, a professor from Boston. And I think he's in psychology. There's a lot of work that comes out of psychology that relates to reading and is all about reading. So you have to know that reading as a research topic is incredibly challenging, and it covers a wide range of fields. It's not just done in universities under education, but it covers psychology, it covers speech language, it covers memory, and a huge number of people read across a whole lot of areas to come up with all of the research papers that some teachers read. You better talk, Lisa.
I mean, you know how I feel. Again, being in the medical community, there's no way we all keep up with the science. Like, you have to. And I don't know why this is such an issue with the education system. I mean, I'm laughing. There's nothing funny here, but it's so frustrating that, you know, the science, you've got lots of different people working on the science in different areas. And then the education system just go in and no, we're fine. We're doing it fine. What other pre-packaged program can we buy and educate everybody? Like, it's so frustrating.
That becomes the politics in education, which is really challenging. Really, really, really challenging.
You think?
Yeah. Because I was talking to my sister last night, and Lenore is going to talk on our sessions as well. And she said all of the nursing care and medical profession are looking at trauma-informed care.
Mm-hmm.
Do teachers do trauma-informed care? I mean, it's yet another layer on their list of things to learn about.
And I'm all for that. But the thing that's frustrating is that if you could realize that if you could fix this problem, and we know how to do that, you could minimize a lot of the trauma that's happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
Our school district, and I'm not going to be naming specifics, but our school district has essentially 2 alternative schools.
Yeah.
When I recently talked to one of them, and they were just sort of like they'd never heard of this idea that maybe dyslexia could have been the problem that started some of these issues from these kids. Like, I don't understand how people can't put 2 and 2 together. Maybe it's once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. I don't know.
Yes.
But they're coming at it thinking that these kids are winding up in the alternative schools because they've had other unfortunate things happen in their lifetime. They, for whatever reason, in the classroom, they're not getting along with kids and stuff, but they're not looking at the fact that a lot of this is starting in the classroom when they're not keeping up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure how this gets missed. I'm not sure how I don't know how that happens. I don't know. I would like some answers to that, but maybe I'm not going to get those. I don't know.
I just go back to Nicholas. You know, he sat in the classroom and he totally withdrew for that whole of grade 1. The teacher shouted at him. I don't understand why that behaviour was acceptable. I don't understand why the school allowed it to happen, and why no one called me up and said, this child is learning nothing. We can't let this happen. Lois, take him out of school. Let's do anything. That rather than let him face this failure.
Well, that happened to my son's friend. Again, I won't give any names, but they were in elementary school and in the special education room. And the teacher said to this little kid, you're the dumbest student I've ever had, in front of all of his friends. So, of course, he was upset. He came home, and my son was telling me about this, and I was talking to the parent of this other little boy, and they, of course, the parents were furious. But unfortunately, at the time, the special education teacher that said this, she was going through a rough personal time. Yeah. And the parents of this little boy didn't feel like they wanted to put more on her. So they kind of let that slide. But now thinking back, and this woman, we talked about this pretty recently, and she said we should have brought that up, like called it out on the carpet, because he's not the only kid that somebody's saying that to. Now, I'm not bashing teachers because I know that they have a tough job, and I know that they want to be able to teach kids, and it's frustrating, and I get all that. But again, this is a kid that was struggling with reading, was never offered a reading program that went over phonics and stuff like this. In fact, we started fighting for him once he was in, I believe, the 8th grade. Like, he's in 8th grade. We had another student who was starting high school, and then they were just teaching this kid phonics. After arguing with us about this for an entire year, once we found out what the problem was. But that's the frustrating part, that these kids are shutting down, they're acting up, they're whatever. And here's the thing with the trauma-informed care. Like, I'm all for that, in the sense of kids that have had traumatic things in their lifetime. It changes the brain. And Dr. Dijkstra talks about how, the brain, if the brain has been repeatedly traumatized by a thing, they're sort of on high alert. There's a lot of brain energy going into
survival.
Survival and being on high alert, that they're not so much caring about what's going on in the classroom. But the kids who are being traumatized in the classroom, my son in the 8th grade was having a rotten time reading. He's in science class, and there are notes all over the board that he can't read. So the whole time he's sitting in science class, he's afraid that somebody's going to call on him. Like, talking about being on high alert, he's on high alert because he knows he doesn't know what's going on, and there's no way he's going to raise his hand and say that. And I don't know, I'm not sure why we missed this. Yes, it's true that some kids have come from traumatic backgrounds, have had traumatic things happen, the families have had chaos, whatever, but there's other kids, or maybe even on top of having a chaotic background. See, there's another thing. If dyslexia is genetic, and we know that sometimes that limits their opportunities in life, how do we know that the family hasn't been affected? Maybe the father or the mother, or it's a generational thing. Maybe they're under a lot of stress because they have lower paying jobs because they were never taught. Like, we can't just keep saying, well, it's the family's fault. It's the family's fault. Maybe we have to look into the family and see, were there learning problems here? Because we know that can cause a lot of unnecessary stress. I just don't know why this whole thing's not put together.
I agree. Yes, I agree with you. With you. Yes, I agree. Lisa, we've got so much to talk about.
Yes, we do.
And, we've got one of the ladies is from Ghana. I think I've got that right. Rosalind. She talks about, let me get the picture on me. She talks about being publicly humiliated because she could not learn. So it's, we've got stories from around the world that we will share. Our topic is When Learning is Trauma. We start on August 31st, and we're waiting to see who our mystery guest is. So thank you, Lois Letchford and
Lisa McCarty.
And we will see you again as we practice with our technology to make sure we get it right for August 31st. And I'll have a few other guests on between now and then. So check us out, and share. Hit like, hit subscribe, and share. Thank you. Now I can talk to you.